and it is 10 a.m. So we're going to go ahead and start with the first item on the agenda, which is introductions. So without any further ado, I'll just go ahead and ask people in no particular order to introduce themselves by sharing their name, what organization they represent, and perhaps a little bit about what their organization does. I know we have a few people on the call today that are new to joining this working group meeting, so it'd be helpful for them to have some context for what your organizations do. So with that being said, I'm going to go ahead and start with Jerry Lucius.
This is Jerry Lucius from the Beacon Group. We're a nonprofit organization to give people, handicapped people with disabilities with jobs, and I take care of them. Other than that, glad to meet everyone.
Great. Thank you, Jerry. Glad to have you here this morning. Michael Alexander.
There you go. I had to unmute myself. Yeah, Mike Alexander from town of Oro Valley. We have our little Sun Shuttle dial right up here. Yeah. Hello to everybody.
Thank you, Michael. And then Irma. I don't know if Irma can hear me, so I'm going to circle back to Irma here in just a moment.
Yes. I'm sorry. I had to step and get my coffee really quick. I'm here.
Okay, I just could hear a little bit of indistinct noises in the background, so I wasn't sure if you could hear me. So
No,
good morning, Irma.
Good morning.
Oh, if you could share what organization you represent, a little bit about what you do, that'd be great.
Sorry. Like I said, I ran and grabbed my coffee really quick. I'm with Hope Incorporated. I'm the fleet manager for Tucson, Arizona, Tucson, Yuma. Well, just Tucson.
Just Tucson.
All the other ones because this is Peg.
Okay, thank you. And then I see Nora. Nora, good morning. Would you like to introduce yourself and your organization? I might circle back to Nora. I'm not sure if she is able to hear me at the moment. Shaylin.
Hi, I'm Shaylin with Project Amore, and we work with children and families with the special needs children programs and Department of Child Safety.
Thank you, Shaylin. And then Steve Knapp.
Hi, I'm Steve Knapp. I'm the operations manager for Hope Inc. and Irma's assistant.
Thank you, Steve. And then Ryan Gillespie.
Yeah, my name's Ryan Gillespie. I'm with United Community Health Center. I'm the transportation and safety manager.
Good morning, Ryan. Glad to have you today. I'm John Hawbaker.
I am John Hawbaker, town of Oro Valley, and one of the transit coordinators there.
And then I'm just going to, good morning, John. I'm going to circle back to Nora. Nora, can you hear me? Not sure if Nora can hear me. All right, we'll circle back to Nora again. Let's see, Debbie Frent. Morning, Debbie, can you hear me? All right, we'll circle back to Debbie as well. I see Sean Mangan.
Hi, good morning.
Good morning, Sean. How are you?
Good, thank you.
Did you want to introduce yourself a little bit for
Sure.
context for people that are joining us today?
Sure. Good morning. My name is Sean Mangan. I'm the assistant general manager at Sunvan. Glad to join the meeting. I've been in this role for about 5 years, and we have a pretty robust operation at the moment. So glad to participate and just learn from others and contribute what I can to the meeting. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Sean. I appreciate it. And then Debbie.
Yes. Can you hear me now?
I can. Yes.
Yay. Okay. It was giving me some challenges.
That's all right.
Good morning. I'm Debbie Frent, and I work with Catholic Community Services, COPD. I'm here on behalf of Jessica Winchester and Carmen Johnson, who typically participate in this meeting. However, unfortunately, they are in another meeting. So they said, you've been here before, please do it again.
Okay.
And I'll be taking notes and sharing with them.
Fantastic. Well, we're glad to have you. Thank you so much
Thank
for
you
being a
so
part of
much.
this.
Well,
You're
and
most welcome.
my apologies for my awkward last minute entry to the meeting.
It's not awkward. You're fine. Don't worry about it
Okay.
at all.
Thank
Okay.
you.
All right. Thank you. Patricia? Good morning, Patricia.
Can you hear me?
I can, yes. Go
Okay,
ahead.
yes. Good morning, everyone. I'm just trying to get on right now. My screen is still, I think I don't know if there's anything else. Anyways, good morning, everyone. I'm joining this morning. Glad to be here.
Great.
And I'm not sure what else you want me
Could
to
you
say.
share what organization you represent?
Okay. Okay,
Yeah.
sorry. Tricia Pablo. I'm with the Thana Autumn Nation.
Great. Thank you, Patricia. Appreciate you. And then I see Tom McKinney.
Hi, Tom McKinney. This is my first meeting, and I'm with Interfaith Community Services.
Good morning, Tom. And for those that might not have as much familiarity with your organization, could you share a little bit about how you serve in the region?
Sure. We are a social service agency that has three major facets. One, we deal with seniors, older adults, and helping them get to appointments, providing food. We run food banks and a mobile food truck. We have workforce development centers and self-sufficiency programs. And we also participate in helping people not be evicted through emergency financial assistance.
Great. Thank you, Tom. I appreciate it. And then I'm going to see if Nora is able to hear me one last time before we continue.
Hello.
Hi, Nora.
Hi. Are you able to hear me now?
I can.
Hi, everybody. I'm Nora with Project Amor. I'm the program coordinator. We work with special needs.
Great. Thank you, Nora. I'm glad it worked out. I was getting a little worried. Like, I hope she'll be able to introduce herself. All right. And then I see Elizabeth Lewis.
Hi, good morning. I'm the Corporate Advancement Officer for Fellowship Square, and we have a large campus in Tucson. We're actually the Arizona's largest community for senior living. We offer independent living, assisted living, and memory care, and Tucson is one of our campuses. Oh, and this is my first meeting.
Great. Thank you. Thank you, Elizabeth. I appreciate it. So thank you so much for everyone's support of doing the introductions this morning. I know it's so helpful to offer some context, especially when new organizations or individuals join this particular working group. So thank you so much for that. Glad to have everyone here today. So we're going to go ahead and move on to the next item in the agenda. And you're probably familiar with this for the most part, but there are some new folks on the call today. So we're still going to go through the in-kind form. So as you may know, regional planning efforts are enhanced by a recording time that's donated by attendees, volunteers, and participants. And PAG collects data on the time dedicated to those meetings and activities to apply for use as matching funds for grants and federal dollars. So if you as an individual during this meeting are paid with federal dollars, please let us know now so that we don't account for it in our in-kind calculations. So as we do our calculations, the time spent in preparation for the meeting will be estimated by PAG staff who are knowledgeable of the agenda and of course the meeting materials. And at the conclusion of this meeting, a session report will be automatically calculated for your time spent in the meeting. And so as a closing statement, time spent working on PAG or RTA initiatives, programs, and special projects may also be eligible for consideration for matching funds. So I'm just going to ask if anyone is paid through federal dollars that you share that with me now, or at least send me an email so that we do not account for it in our in-kind. Okay, we're going to go ahead and move on to the next item in the agenda. All right, so hopefully everyone did receive the meeting primer that I sent out, and my hope is that the meeting primer serves you well in being able to prepare well for the items that are on the agenda for working group. So as you may have noticed on the agenda that was sent out, and as well in the meeting primer, we are going to talk about regional coordination goals and specifically new or expanded service. And a lot of this is tying forward to our plans for the next grant cycle. So you'll see a kind of a common theme as we go through the items on the agenda, because they are all pointing in that direction. So my hope is that through our discussion today, that will set the stage for us to have a successful grant cycle in 2025. So with regard to new or expanded service, it's important to always ensure that those particular items are in alignment with our coordinated plan. So if you're not familiar with the coordinated plan, or if you haven't visited in a while, it would be a good reminder to get familiar with it. It is on the PAG website, so pagregion.com. If you need me to send you the link, let me know, and I'm more than happy to send you the link for easy access to that particular document. But towards the end of the document, you will see the regional goals that are outlined, as well as like funding priorities, et cetera. So as you're thinking about new or expanded service, you want to make sure that it's aligned with the coordinated plan. And so some things that were in the primer that I sent out for you to give some thought around as you begin to make your initial plans for any proposed projects that might fall under new or expanded service, there's some things to consider. And these things that we're going to be considering today are directly in alignment with the coordinated plan. So one of the things that I asked for people to give some consideration around is about how any proposed projects that are considered new or expanded service might be pertinent to helping seniors get to medical appointments or any kind of support service, seniors going to grocery shopping or to pick up prescriptions. And so if that is something that is of value to you or might be worth considering, I would encourage you to start your planning for that proposed project now, because believe it or not, 2025 will come around really quickly. So the other part is to think about the different levels of support that are offered for your current programs or any future projects that are tied to those types of transportation services. So if you're expanding hours, expanding your service area, expanding the populations that you serve, all those things with regard to your existing programs, those would be still things that you would want to consider when you're looking at new or expanded service. The other piece is for your proposed projects that would be important to consider. And some of these are going to fall more in what I would perhaps say is more in the paratransit space than in those that are doing very client-based transportation services. So one is more open to the general public, one is more client-based. So for those that are in somewhat of a paratransit, public transit type of model, sometimes with regard to different services, there might be conditional eligibility. And so when you saw the primer, you might have seen that word choice, meaning conditional eligibility, and that is oftentimes rooted in that service. However, it could also be something that is important to you with regard to your programs. So it's just something to be mindful of. Is there conditional eligibility? Is there not? What does that look like? Who are you serving? How does that align with the coordinated plan in terms of and priorities in our region? So give thought to that. And then another aspect of any kind of new or expanded service is to make sure that you understand what's considered incidental use. And if there is something that's currently considered incidental use, does it have the propensity to become a new or expanded project in order to serve people in new ways? So those are some other things that were on the primer. But obviously all those things are still rooted in how does whatever your program is, whether it's new or expanded or not, how does it align with the coordinated plan? How does it bridge a regional gap? What are the regional gaps? So that would be kind of the first question you need to answer for yourself through looking at the coordinated plan. And then are there any opportunities to develop a memorandum of understanding with another organization? Because as you know, in the grant application process, one of the main criteria is coordination. And so that can serve you well, perhaps in both arenas, right? A new or expanded project, but also under coordination. So those are some things to definitely consider. Some other considerations as we look at coordination of services, what are the opportunities to decrease demand on public paratransit? So how can we work better together to serve people in our region? Is there an opportunity to expand your service hours or just the days of the week that you offer service? So those are some things to consider. And then where is there the potential for growth? So if you're primarily serving in a very urbanized area, what are the needs in rural areas that perhaps there's an opportunity to serve in that? If in the opposite direction, right, if you're primarily serving in a rural area, what are the opportunities for you to perhaps serve urbanized, or just expand your current service area boundary with regard to rural or urbanized areas? So those are some things to consider, and obviously making sure those pieces are in alignment with the needs identified in the coordinated plan. The other piece would be making sure that your expanded project with regard to trip purpose, is an appropriate trip purpose. So if you haven't looked at the guidebook from ADOT in terms of what's considered an eligible trip purpose pertinent to 5310 funding, that would be something to definitely look at or revisit. So typically it's rooted in healthcare, shopping, getting plugged into different types of resources or support services. Those are kind of the main headings. There are others. And then the last piece would be to look at to what extent the new or expanded service is helping to balance accessibility and, of course, reliability of different types of specialized services in the region. So usually we look for that in areas where perhaps existing specialized transportation services such as paratransit might not be as far reaching in that particular area. So again, tying back to a particular gap in service, and those are typically identified in the coordinated plan. So I wanted to kind of open up for discussion questions that people might have about new or expanded service. One, to allow for you to get some answers, because some of the questions that you might have, I would need to work with ADOT on getting some answers on. So an example of that would be incidental use. That's usually a question people have that ADOT actually has to get answers to through the FTA for agreement on those things. So some of those questions don't get answered quite as easily, but others might be a little easier to answer. So if you have some questions about new or expanded service, we can kind of start a dialogue about that, given the elements I just shared. Any questions about new or expanded service?
Hi, Janine. This is John from Oro Valley.
Hi, John. How are you?
Good. One thing that we have been petitioning for is to provide service to seniors on the weekends.
Mm-hmm.
Right now, they only have service Monday through Friday. Many of them can't get around without us, and they'd like to go to church on weekends and some other kinds of events that they would like to enjoy on weekends that they can't do. So we're seeing if the RTA will be able to add that service into our Oro Valley service. Of course, it's all predicated on funding. So anyways,
Okay.
That's one thing we're working on.
All right. Well, thank you for sharing. I appreciate that. Anyone else have anything to share in terms of like thoughts or questions they have about new or expanded service? So one area that I think is also important to consider is the levels of support that you can offer based on an individual's unique needs or mobility challenges. So giving thought around that will obviously help you articulate the work that you do in your grant application, but also it can shed light on new opportunities to serve people well based on those particular needs. I know the vast majority of you go through something called PASS training, right, which allows you to serve people well with a variety of different types of disabilities. And so given that each of you work in very specialized areas, you might have a particular bench strength in serving a particular population of people compared to another organization. So when you look at development of MOUs or coordination opportunities, that would be something to try to unpack for yourself, is saying where do our strengths lie? What opportunities do we have to share knowledge, insights, wisdom, skills with other organizations so that they too can serve people in new ways? That might not be their centralized focus, but they might encounter serving the needs of different people periodically or intermittently, and your bench strength could allow them to serve those people in new ways. So I would encourage you to give thought around that, because coordination is always a central theme on how we can share resources. So give thought to that. You know how you meet the needs of individuals best, and you also understand the landscape of different mobility challenges that people might have, and how that translates into serving people well with regard to transportation. So I would encourage you to give thought around that. So we're going to go ahead and move to the next item on the agenda if there's no other questions or thoughts on regional coordination goals for new or expanded service. So this topic is regarding cost containment practices and maintaining assets in a state of good repair. And this is a topic that you also saw in the primer. And the hope for this topic is at least twofold. One is to ensure that from a compliance perspective, that our eyes are open in terms of the things that are required of subrecipients for 5310 funding, and that we're maintaining assets in a state of good repair, but also where are there opportunities to be better stewards of resource, both financial, right? So preventive maintenance dollars, making those go farther, but also being good stewards of the assets in terms of ensuring they're in a state of good repair, but we're timely. And perhaps if there's a more efficient way to do that, a more cost-effective way, that we are taking a moment to look at what are the opportunities that exist. And especially as we're leaning into a grant cycle, we're paving the way towards that. What are the things that we can start to unearth or develop that might bode well for a potential funding opportunity for that particular grant cycle? So for cost containment practices and maintaining assets in a state of good repair, in the primer that I sent out, I asked a variety of questions. And some were just literally just primers, right? To encourage you to give thought to these things over the course of the next year, but also for this particular discussion. So if you have vehicles that have lifts, and the vast majority of you do, right? Because ADA accessible vehicles are a priority. We all know that what comes with being successful in lift maintenance. So are there opportunities to do joint lift maintenance agreements? That would be something that you could consider on your own accord. And if that's something that you're interested in, you could reach out to me and we could see how we could potentially facilitate that and ask ADOT what is the best way to approach an organization who has an interest in that. Another part is we've been talking about is mobile maintenance and or after hour maintenance options. What does that look like in the region? Not all organizations have their own in-house mechanics, right? Others have to outsource it. So what does that look like if people are outsourcing certain types of maintenance requirements? Especially in rural areas where it can be harder to get a vehicle into a shop for repairs, given their distance to a facility. That is something that is a focus. The other part is what if a vehicle breaks down and it has to, get repaired, and you're in a very rural setting? What are the options, especially on a weekend or after traditional hours, past the hour of 5 or 6 o'clock? What does that look like? And is there an opportunity for us to work well together, organization to offset some of those concerns. So those are some things to be giving some thought around. The other part is around more the compliance piece, but it still ties well into the grant application, and I'll speak to that in just a moment. So I asked you to give some thought around your current approach for having your annual inspections both scheduled and conducted in a timely manner. So I know almost everyone has gotten at least one email from me with a reminder saying, you know, that the vehicle needs to be inspected. And some people have gotten more than one reminder from me. So with that, I'm asking each organization to give some thought to how often do you get a reminder, whether it be from ADOT or myself, on those annual inspections, but also give some thought to the frequency, you know, is obviously one, but also if you are ever past due on an annual inspection, how past due, right? So is it one day or is it 1 month? You know, 1 week, you know, what is it? And how often does that happen, right? Is it, you know, once in a blue moon, or is it, if we have a little bit of a pattern and we need to really tighten things up? So I would ask for you to really give some thought around that, because in the grant application, one of the things that is looked at is how you're doing with regard to compliance. And so if you are seeking a new vehicle, whether it be for new or expanded service or as a replacement or just to expand your fleet, one could argue that would be also important to evaluate to what extent you're maintaining the vehicles that you currently have. So just make sure that you're doing everything you can to ensure that you can say with confidence that you're maintaining your vehicles in a state of good repair and in a timely fashion and being compliant with that. So the other part is to ask yourself kind of what is your follow-up process when an inspection takes place, right? So there's the inspection that takes place and it passes, is great. And there's a communication process for that, especially if you're taking it outside of an ADOT inspection facility. There also is a communication process that takes place with an ADOT inspection. So take a look on how that is working for you. What challenges do you experience? Is there something that you need support around? But also, if a vehicle does fail, what is your follow-up process to ensure that you're informing ADOT of the repairs being made in a timely fashion? Are you reporting that the vehicle's been taken out of service because of a particular failure? All those pieces are definitely compliance related, arguably safety related, depending on the reason for the failure. But it is tying back to becoming a successful grant applicant as well, right? Because those are things that would be looked at in your grant application. So I would encourage you to take a look at those and see what opportunities there are to kind of tighten that up, obviously just from a compliance standpoint, but also to be successful in future grant cycles. So if you have questions about those processes or need support around a particular element of that, please reach out to me. But in the effort to kind of facilitate some dialogue around this topic, I would be curious to hear from you. What are the challenges that you might be experiencing? What kind of support you might need to make that process easier? Things are you currently looking at with regard to cost containment or just new approaches to maintaining your assets in a state of good repair? So I'm going to open up the floor for discussion around that, and just take feedback and questions one at a time. I know annual inspections is everyone's favorite topic. So I'm going to let you have the floor. So if you have some questions or comments, we can work through them. Any questions on the process? I know we have some newer folks on the call, but even for more seasoned individuals, does anyone have any questions about the process, things that have never been as clear as you would have liked them to be? anything that you need support around, anything like that.
Janine, this is Mike from Oro Valley.
Hi, Mike.
Last year, when they changed their, I guess their process, maybe 2 years ago now, they changed their process on, I'm talking about the ADOT annual inspection.
Sure.
It went from 30 minutes to basically 2 hours. The only complaint I had is that they really didn't say anything. It just started happening. So we were able to, in the past, schedule it within our routes. And then now we just drop it off and pick it up the next day. Some of the stuff that they write up is questionable, I guess. So you have to have a, I guess, a knowledgeable person to pick it up and go through the any write-ups that they have, and then ask questions. So we've had the windshield wipers don't work. So we go there, we look at it. Well, the windshield wipers do work. So I thought it was a spray. Spray works. So I didn't know. So you go back into the office and say, can you explain this to me, kind of a thing? So you do have to do that. In either case, once they write it up, you have to send it off to ADOT once it gets repaired. And we didn't know that until we started failing stuff, which in the past we weren't. So now we found out that you have to respond with the repair within 30 days.
Right.
So we jump all over that. So basically that sits on my desk until we get it repaired, either from a vendor or our own maintenance people. We have to get that repaired. So it's sitting there bugging me, and I'm always asking, is it fixed yet? Is it fixed yet? So we can get that to ADOT timely.
Okay. Well, thank you for sharing that. So I'm sure other people have had similar experiences, whether it be, questions about, why did it fail, getting clarity on that so they know what the next steps look like with some confidence, but also kind of that anticipation, is it ready so that we can communicate to ADOT? But the one piece that I would echo what was just shared was that it's really important to have someone who's knowledgeable, be the person that has the conversation with the inspection station. And this is obviously, important with ADOT, but also with your other inspection station if you take it to a third party, but especially with ADOT, in the sense that if you look at the guidebook, one of the things it says is that when you sign off on that inspection, that you're agreeing to the inspection. And so, and I can pull up the exact word choice, but it's to that effect. So it's important to know what you're agreeing to, right? So because what you're agreeing to helps set the stage for what your next steps are and the timeline associated with that. And to further go with that point is, if there is a disconnect, meaning it says that the windshield wipers, for example, purposes, right, are not working, and that's why it failed. You are in that moment, you're able to identify that they really do work. Then you can figure out, okay, well, what did they mean when they said that they didn't work? And perhaps there's a simple explanation and the vehicle doesn't really fail. It's really a pass. It can get fixed, so to speak, in the moment. Fixed meaning a corrected evaluation of the vehicle. However, if it is something that truly did fail and does need to be repaired, and there's a timeline associated with that, it is your responsibility to make sure that that gets communicated to ADOT within 30 days, that the vehicle is back in working order, that those particular elements of the inspection have been addressed and rectified. Because when you signed on the inspection form saying that you agreed to it, you're essentially also agreeing that you will abide by the policies of being a subrecipient, saying that you will get it fixed within a timely fashion. So all of that gets pulled together. So it's important to understand that. So therefore, the person who goes to that inspection station should be knowledgeable, so they know what questions to ask and can make an informed decision about what next steps look like, and so they can be done in a timely fashion. If you are experiencing any challenges with any of the inspection stations, like there's a hiccup in communication, there's a hiccup in what you're finding in your findings for the inspection report, it's really important that you share that with me. One, because it helps me identify that there's a pattern, and also gives me an opportunity to know to what degree that pattern exists, right? In terms of frequency, meaning how often does it happen? Does it happen every single month? And does it happen to just one organization? Is it happening to multiple organizations? It helps me get some data points so that if I go to ADOT and say like, hey, I have a concern, here's what we're seeing in our region, I could speak to it with confidence saying, you know, on average, it happens this many times per month to this many organizations, or perhaps it's all rooted in a particular vehicle type. It helps me help them figure out what's the best path to fixing that particular situation. So Steve, I see that your hand is raised, so I'm going to go ahead and call on you.
Yeah, we've had some similar experiences. Literally, we had one vehicle, they didn't pass because the dome lights were too dim, and the fix was actually just turning up the dome lights, but that still required us to go have it checked so that we could send in the report that we had it repaired, so on and so forth. So I would say that it's, at least for us, because we're in 8 regions, it's almost impossible for Irma and I to get all over the state to do those inspections. They do seem like they've relaxed a little bit. I don't know what happened with the inspection, but they went from checking your thing without hardly looking at the vehicle to very, almost like they had to find something wrong with your vehicle type inspection. But we have found that from a cost perspective, it is easier to just take the vehicle with their report, do what we have to do in order to make sure that if there is something to be repaired, we repair it. But we've not found it helpful to argue with the inspection staff. We just like, okay, we'll go take it to one of our folks that we know will take care of it, and if it's good, it's good, and we'll be able to get it signed off, and if it needs repair, we'll get it repaired.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you, Steve. But I do hope that as an organization, if you are experiencing any challenges, that you would share that with me, because this way I have an idea of, you know, like I said, how often there's a concern or a potential challenge, and you know, perhaps how widespread it is, or if it happens to be rooted in a particular vehicle type, et cetera. Because in fairness to any inspector, right, if you're on a learning curve, maybe you're new on that job, or your experience is in one particular vehicle and you're on a learning curve with this other particular vehicle, getting some feedback, some constructive criticism, like here's the things that you're on the mark for, and here's some things where you tighten up. It can be helpful, and like the saying goes, you don't know what you don't know. So it can be helpful for that person to kind of bridge the gap in their training or knowledge, so they could be more successful in their role. So we want to make sure that we're being mindful of those types of elements and being fair to the people that are trying to help us. But also, if I can help you, it's helpful for me to have sufficient context and data to be able to bring it to ADOT's attention if there is an issue, because if it's an issue in our region, let's say hypothetically, and you know, then they can go and say like, well, maybe we should see if it's also an issue in another region. So you could be potentially helping not just your own organization, but other organizations, both here in the PAG region, but potentially other regions. So it's always good to share if you have a concern, so that we can see how we can best address it.
Yeah, I have to say, it has gotten better. It was right after the switch, we literally had in the PAG region 100% of our vehicles fail. And like I said, one of them was a dimmer switch, and it seemed like they were out for blood, and I don't know what happened, but clearly they were told you need to do a better job. And we've talked about it at several meetings. It's just one of those things where I think it's easier to live with bureaucracy than it is to complain and bat your head against it, because I don't want Hope to be tagged so that every time a vehicle does come in, they know we're the ones that complain. It's just not worth the effort to fight the system.
Janine, I'll add to that against Mike from Oro Valley. When it first happened, I guess ADOT, like Steve was saying, is ADOT changed the rules on the inspectors. They changed the forms, they changed everything. And I kind of agree with Steve about they were like looking, making sure they found something, whatever it is. But once I figured out and I talked to them a couple times to say, hey, what's going on? And they were the ones that told me all this process changed. They have been very good with us as far as letting us know, okay, this one's done if you want to come get it. We're lucky enough for the first time that we're able to swap one vehicle out with another vehicle the next day. So we just leave it there and we go swap it out the next day. But yeah, they were writing up every single thing. Now it's probably a 50-50 versus every single vehicle was failing for every little thing. But we still have a more knowledgeable person go down there to pick it up so we can ask questions. However, being that we pick it up the next day, it's already in the system. So even like the windshield wipers didn't work that actually did, it's already in the system. We still have to get it inspected. We still have to send it off to ADOT. It's too late to change anything.
Okay. I'm taking some notes. I'm going to ask some questions about the process and what that looks like, because I still think there's an opportunity for some remedies, so I'm going to see what I can do. Ask some good questions.
They've been pretty nice with us as far as letting us know the stuff is done. And so they're trying to help the process out a little bit. But yeah, it does take a couple hours now versus it used to take, maybe 30, 45 minutes. And we never failed anything before. And now we're, like I say, it's got a 50-50 chance that something is written up.
Is it still taking that amount of time, like leaning into 2 hours?
Yes.
Do other people experience that as well? Jerry, do you experience that?
Yes. Yeah, we've went from I'm going to say 1 hour to like half a day, and then they're only there from like 9 o'clock till noon, and that's all the time they do inspections. And so we are really we have to basically one a day, and then for about 3 to 4 weeks, the amount of vehicles we have to take down. We only get like maybe 2 a week, and then with their inspection process.
And they only do inspections between 9 and noon. Is that what you said?
Yeah. And then a lot of times we get, okay, we're set out, we're pushed out until the middle of the month. That's all the time we have for inspections.
Okay.
So yeah, very limited on time. And then again, like I don't mean to bash, I'm not here to bash, ADOT and everything, but we've been hit on, our last 3 vehicles been hit on bloodborne pathogens. You don't have it, but it's in our first aid kit, but it's not, they don't open up the first aid kit to see it, that it's there, but they still mark it as we don't have a bloodborne pathogen in the vehicle, but it's in our first aid kit.
Okay. All right. Well, that's good feedback. I mean, so because this way I can work with Edmund Shepard up at ADOT and kind of unpack what is the process, what should be the process, and what can we do on our side, right, to help the process run smoother, right? So if we need to do something differently and it's an easy fix and it makes the process run smoother, okay, well, let's tackle that. Let's champion that. If ADOT's not aware that they're only available from 9 to 12, that's creating a potential backlog on why, vehicles aren't getting inspected as timely as one might like. I think that's important feedback to understand, well, why is it only from 9 to 12? And the other piece is, if it is taking 2 hours, we should know why it's taking 2 hours. Is it because it's understaffed and it's temporary? Is it because the inspection process is just that much more thorough? Like, what's the why, right? But also 2 hours. We also have to understand that not all organizations have the same fleet size, and they're traveling different distances to get to the inspection station. So the impact it has on their programs and their ability to serve people in the region, which is the purpose of having the vehicles, right? It puts a hamper on things. So I think there's an opportunity to just kind of unpack it and understand it. And so this kind of feedback I think is really important to have, because it allows us to open up a dialogue with ADOT and say like, hey, let's see what we can understand here, because here's how we're seeing it on our side. What is it that we don't know because we don't live in your world, right? And then vice versa, and see how we can kind of, meet in the middle and make it easier for both parties, right? For the people that are doing the inspections, but also for the organizations that are heavily reliant on these vehicles to do the work that they do, but also want to be in compliance, and they want to do it in a timely fashion. So I think there's an opportunity to have a good conversation around it, but this is where it starts, right? We have to kind of know where the bumps in the road are, where the pain points are, so that we can have an informed discussion. So thank you for sharing that. I did not realize they only did inspections between 9 and noon.
Yeah.
See, that's new information for me. I had heard it was taking longer than the 30 minutes, like historically, but I had not heard it was lasting quite as long as what was shared today. So those are good data points that we can kind of take a look at and see what patterns might exist, if at all. Maybe it's just an interesting season right now in terms of maybe staffing changes. I don't know. I can't speak for them, but it's good to find out kind of the why behind certain things.
Thank you.
Yeah, and in fairness, right? So if the reason why it's taking 2 hours is that we can have a broader view on what's being examined, what's looked at. Let's pick on bloodborne pathogen kits for a moment, right? If their standard is that the bloodborne pathogen kit has to be visible, they do not open up any other boxes. They do not open up even a glove box to look for something. So if they can't see it with the naked eye, then it's going to be an automatic fail. And I'm just talking hypothetically, right?
No, if we have to have that, we'll get it out. We'll put it out for them, but
right.
I mean, we don't know.
Exactly
we
right.
Don't know.
Right.
We go down there and they hit us for that. And I say it's in our first aid kit.
Yes.
We check that every month. So I mean, I know that's it's there.
There. So that might be some like low hanging fruit, or if you will, right? Like if our understanding becomes that we know that they're not going to open anything, they're just going to look for the first aid kit, not necessarily going to look inside it to look for a bloodborne pathogen kit. Okay, well then we don't want a whole bunch of vehicles failing unnecessarily, saying that it doesn't have one when it really does. We just have a disconnect in communication. Let's see how we can remedy that. So it's like one example, but maybe there's others, right, that we can do that are kind of easy fixes for both parties, because we don't want to create rework, and I'm sure they don't want rework. So if vehicles are failing perhaps unnecessarily, and it's going to create more work on their in the end also. So I think there's an opportunity to have a conversation around it. So I appreciate you sharing it. All right, anything else? Since clearly I'm going to have a conversation with some people up in ADOT to see what we can do to make things better. If there's anything else that that I can share and inquire about, that would be helpful to me, I'd appreciate it. Okay. All right, so we're going to go ahead.
Oh, hi, it's Shaylin.
Hi.
I have a question.
Yeah.
So, I mean, we have our inspections done here in Tucson, and we've had fairly good luck with them. And it takes us about an hour, and I have learned to schedule it like a couple months in advance to get it done in time. But when they were talking about them, already entering it into the system. Mm-hmm. Is that like they're taking the report that they give us that we forward over? They're taking that report and putting into the ADOT system on the 5310 vehicle. Is that what they were saying?
I think so. I mean, I don't want to speak for anyone else, but I'll tell you what I understand about the process. So what I understand the process is when ADOT inspection station inspects the vehicle and they type up the report and they let you know that it either passed or failed. That report, that EQS report, gets sent up to ADOT electronically. So I think that's what whoever was speaking to that, I think that's what that person was referring to, that it automatically gets sent up.
Okay.
So once it's considered failed and it's in the system saying that the vehicle failed, then ADOT knows to expect some kind of communication from that particular agency saying, yes, acknowledge that the vehicle failed inspection for this, that, and the other reason. that here's our documentation within 30 days that says you have remedied the issue.
Okay.
So
Okay,
I
yeah.
think that's
Okay,
what
that makes sense.
was being spoke to, but I don't want to talk for someone else, but I believe that's what they were referring to.
Okay, thank you.
And in the same breath, if you take it to a third party and it was to fail, you have a similar responsibility, meaning that if it fails, you get it fixed within 30 days and submit the documentation. You have an additional responsibility, meaning that whether it passes or fails, you have to send that documentation to ADOT to show that you did have the vehicle inspected, because there isn't an automatic send on that particular report. So you're basically having to satisfy two requirements, right? You have to prove that you actually did get inspected, because it doesn't get sent automatically. And then you have to satisfy the remedy if it did fail. So that's two. The other piece with that, I would say, since we're still talking about inspections, is I know sometimes people have to wait a while to get their vehicle inspected, because the earliest you can get in is January 15th of 2024, or whatever the story, right? You have to wait for the calendar to roll forward to bring your vehicle in for inspection. So when you get a notification that says, hey, your vehicle is, T- 4 days away from being due for an inspection, or even if you can be proactive about it and within the next 30 days it's going to come due for inspection, because you should have kind of a sense of when different vehicles are going to come due for inspection. There's a rhythm, right? Because they happen annually. If you can get in front of that and anticipate it, if you can email myself, but Edmund specifically, but copy me and say, this particular vehicle or vehicles, they are scheduled for inspection on these respective dates. It allows ADOT or Edmund with his team to put it into the system that A, you're aware that the vehicle needs to be inspected, B, that you've taken action on it, you've scheduled it for inspection. But the reason why it's not inspected yet is just because you're waiting for that date to come to pass, which feels differently to ADOT, right? I would imagine, than sending a notification out and not knowing if the vehicle is really being scheduled or is scheduled up until you actually do it in however many days, right? Depending on when you can get your slot. It's much better for them to have the confidence that, okay, I see this organization is due for inspections. They've already scheduled it. We don't need to send them any reminders because we're just waiting for the calendar to move forward, versus they sent an email with a reminder, they haven't heard anything, and they're just kind of hoping and waiting, right? So if you could be proactive on the communication side to let them know that, yes, we're on it, we've scheduled the inspection, we're just waiting for the calendar to move forward. I think that would be a big help on ADOT's side, to have confidence that you're doing what you need to do to take care of the vehicles, and they're not left just kind of wondering. So if that is helpful to you, I would encourage you to do that. I know Edmund finds value in it, so I would encourage you to do that if you can. Right. Any other questions, thoughts, concerns about vehicle inspections, or anything in the space of maintaining assets in a state of good repair? All right, we're going to move to item number 3 on the agenda, which I believe is preparing for FTA Section 5310 fiscal year 2025 grant cycle. So in the primer, you probably saw that I gave you some very specific questions to give some thought around, and you might have also received from me kind of a timeline, I guess you could say, for preparing for the upcoming grant cycle. So in that timeline, I try to put all the things that you should be thinking of, actively doing, or creating in various months throughout this coming year, being 2024, so that as 2024 draws to a close, and you're just waiting for 2025 to emerge when the NOFA comes out and the grant application opens, you'll be in a fantastic posture just to be ready to focus on uploading those documents, because you'll have them all ready, and then also had a lot of time to prepare well for how you're going to speak to your proposed projects. I have a lot of confidence that they're already going to be in the coordinated plan because that is one of the requirements. You'll know you've submitted a lot of other things that are pertinent to that grant application cycle well in advance. And I think that helps take a lot of stress off. So if you did not get that timeline from whatever reason, please reach out to me and I'll make sure that you received it. But in the primer, one of the things that I asked for you to give thought around is how you can structure over the next 12 months, fuzzy math, right? Your preparation efforts for this particular grant cycle. So with that question, I'm hopeful that the timeline that I sent out will be helpful to you to use it as a framework to decide how you want to structure or prepare for the grant cycle over the next 12 months. So what I sent out is not written in stone. It's a living, breathing document, and change it however you wish. It's just something to consider in terms of the general flow of things commensurate with obligations that I have on my end to help support you well for 2025 grant cycles. So I would do that. The other piece is making sure that you understand what your current vehicle utilization is. And so this is something I think that can kind of get away from people really quickly. So I would encourage you, if you don't have a strong sense of what your current vehicle utilization is, right? How many miles you put on it per year, how many trips, all that, how many people you're serving, all the data points that are commensurate with those vehicles. If you don't have a really strong lens for it today, start thinking about how you're going to get a stronger sense of it so that you'll know, like, okay, well, here's where we stood last year. And then as 2024 chips away, you'll have a sense of what 2024 looks like. And then those 2 years, right, combined, you will give you a lot of information to help you figure out what you might want to speak to in your grant application. The other piece is it'll help you use the guidebook in its fullest capacity, because if you're applying for a vehicle, right, one of the things that is examined is vehicle utilization, and there are very distinct vehicle utilization standards or guidelines in the guidebook that need to be met or satisfied. So you want to make sure that you see how you're pacing with regard to those, but remember that those guidelines are the minimum, right? It's not the maximum, it's the minimum. So you don't really even qualify, so to speak, to be considered for a vehicle until you hit that threshold. It's not a guarantee, right? It's just, it's the minimum. It's like, okay, well, we can at least have a conversation about it, right? If you hit this threshold. But this is a competitive grant, right? So if you're just meeting the minimum, you may or may not be the most competitive with regard to vehicle utilization for that particular vehicle. So it's something to be cognizant of as you decide what forecasted projects you have, and then what vehicles you might be asking for, et cetera, and also how you characterize the merits of your grant application. So it's just something to be mindful of, and it's always better to start early, right? So give some thought to that. And then if you look at your vehicle utilization, you're like, oh, it's not quite where I thought it would be for us to be competitive. You can start to kind of unearth what are the opportunities to increase vehicle utilization, and what does that look like? Is there an MOU opportunity? Is there growth opportunities? What does that look like? So with that, you'll need to understand vehicle selection, right? So this is another thing that can kind of get away from you if we're not careful. So I'm planting some seeds on things to be mindful of. So at a certain point in time, ADOT will start to communicate on vehicle selection, meaning what is going to be available for people who are applying for a vehicle through 5310 funding. So even if we don't necessarily have that today, right, because it could change or it could stay the same, it's important to kind of know where we've been. Like this most recent grant cycle is probably a good lens to look at it through. So if nothing changes and these are the exact same vehicle selections as we had in the most recent grant cycle application, do those vehicle choices work well for our organization? what questions do we still have about those vehicles, whether it be how they're configured, different options, but also local match. Will we be prepared for that level of local match commensurate with what types of projects we might be applying for? So when we say vehicle selection, think about all the things that are pertinent to vehicle selection. It's the seating capacity, the accessibility features, securements, right? The way that you intend to use the vehicle in terms of, you know, are you in a rural setting or are you in an urbanized setting? How many people are you picking up? What are their needs? How often do people get in and out of a vehicle? What does that transportation look like in terms of, is it more curb to curb? Is it door to door? Do people actually have literal curbs, or are you descending a ramp or a lift onto an uneven surface? You know, what are all the variables at play to ensure that the vehicle that you select is truly going to meet your needs long term? But then the other piece of it should also be, if this is a vehicle type that we've never really championed before in terms of seeking to get funding around, do we really have a good understanding of what the maintenance costs are associated with that vehicle? And do we know what's expected of us in terms of maintaining a good state of repair? So if you have some questions that are pertinent to a particular vehicle, take the opportunity for this year, this 2024 year, the year that you reach out to other organizations that use that particular vehicle and say, like, what's your experience been with it? What do you like about the vehicle? You know, is there anything that you wish you would have done differently? Or if they give you some feedback, say, well, what makes that statement true? Because maybe their opinion is rooted in the way they use it, but based on your needs, you might not hold the same view. So take this time to ask those kinds of questions so you can really think it through. Because the last thing you want to do is apply for a vehicle, be excited that you're getting it, receive it, and then once you get into the throes of using it, you're like, no, I wish we would have done a few things differently. So take advantage of the time that's on your side to get really comfortable with the vehicle selections that are out there and understanding how they can really best meet your needs, but also what will come with that vehicle in terms of your sense of responsibility in how you'll use it, but also keep it in a good state of repair. So the other part is for those that might be considering applying for like preventive maintenance or operating funds, this is a great year to really hone in on what your costs have been historically. And then also what you anticipate your costs to be this year. And then as you get closer to the end of the year, really drill in and say, like, well, were we accurate with that, right? And then what do we see as being any variables that could be thrown in the mix that might change those numbers, right? So give some thought around that, because as you know, one of the things that's in the grant application is not only just speaking to the number that you want to ask for funding, right? We want X thousands of dollars. You have to speak to how you came up with that number and what makes that number true, right? But the other piece is that sustainability of the project. So it's not just, how do you know that that number is true? How do you know that you're going to be able to uphold this particular program that you're asking for preventive maintenance dollars to support? How do we know it will be sustainable long term, right? So you're going to be helping yourself answer that question well, so that it reads well on your grant application, so that whoever is evaluating your grant application can have lots of confidence that this is very well thought out and it is a sustainable project. So use the time on your side to do that. A great place to get at least a initial understanding of what is looked at in the grant application is to revisit your past grant application, because you'll see all the questions that were asked last time. Sorry about that. The grant application typically doesn't change that much from grant cycle to grant cycle. Every once in a while, they remove a question or rephrase it slightly differently, or add maybe a few subtleties here and there. For the most part, the application tends to stay the same in terms of the questions that are asked. The rubric is the one piece that has changed perhaps the most over the last maybe 3 or 4 grant cycles. But we seem to be in a pattern where, at least for the last 2 grant cycles, if I'm not mistaken, the rubric's been the same. I anticipate it to be the same in 2025, but that's just a speculation on my part. Inaccurate on that, but right now, all we know is what we've used in this most recent one. So assuming we use the same one for the 2025 grant cycle, that would be a good place to start. So I would encourage you to look at that rubric and look at your grant application from the past, or if you've never applied for 5310 funding, if I haven't already sent you a grant application that's blank for you to have as an example, and I'll be happy to share that with you. The same with the rubric that has been used in the past. So those are good places to look for some general food for thought and considerations. The other piece is I would encourage you to make sure that you're aware of all the different funding categories. So most are very familiar with asking for a new vehicle, right? But there's new and expanded, and there's also replacement, two different buckets, if you will. And then most people are relatively familiar with preventive maintenance, but may not necessarily always be familiar with what all the eligible reimbursement expenses are for preventive maintenance. So getting a very good understanding of what is considered a reimbursable expense under preventive maintenance will really help you sharpen your saw on what you might want to ask for in total dollar amounts for preventive maintenance, but also be able to speak to it well. So when we tie back to cost tracking and forecasting, you just start with really understanding what preventive maintenance entails as a reimbursable expense. The other piece for that in terms of different funding buckets is their operating expenses. That's another funding bucket you can seek funding for potentially. There are some specific requirements around that, so educating yourself on that. Of course, there's mobility management, other funding opportunities. So maybe you've never looked at it, maybe don't really understand it. So if you have questions about that and you want to know more about that particular funding type, now would be a great time to kind of unpack that and see if that's something you want to apply for. And then the other two pieces are non-ITS projects, non-intelligent transportation systems, and then ITS projects, which are intelligent transportation systems. So depending on your level of understanding of those or interest in those, now would be a great time to kind of unpack those as well and see what questions still remain. I know the latter two, the non-ITS and the ITS, are perhaps some of the more complicated funding types in terms of there are some additional asks of ADOT with regard to the application. So knowing what those asks are and being able to prepare well for them while you still have time on your side is definitely something to give a lot of thought around, because time marches quickly, and those are some pieces you don't want to leave to the last minute, but they're also pieces that can take some time to develop. So you want to have time on your side to develop them. So I'd encourage you to understand what the different funding types are so that you don't walk away from an opportunity wishing that you'd known about the other funding types a little bit more. Sometimes we can fall victim to just doing what we've always done and forget to look at other opportunities. And I just don't want you to miss out on any. So take advantage of taking a look at those different funding types and see what other projects you might still want to apply for that perhaps you haven't given thought to in the past. And then some other pieces that I would encourage you to be mindful of, especially if you look at the rubric and it's very project specific criteria. Some of the things that are in that section are whether or not you're on track to meet your Exhibit A requirements. It talks a lot about your reporting, submitting of reimbursements in a timely fashion. Other things about participation level in coordination efforts, right? Do you attend the meetings? Do you participate in the meetings? Does anything come after the meetings? Like, are there any things that you champion as a result of conversations that we have during some of the meetings, all those pieces are evaluated in that particular section of the application. So take a look and say, how are we trending with the way that we submit our quarterly reports? Are we on time? How are we doing with our reimbursement requests? Do we do it in a timely fashion? Are we consistent? How are we doing with our level of participation in coordination meetings? What are we doing after coordination meetings happen? Is there something that we can do to be stronger? Because all those pieces are looked at and they're a part of this competitive grant process. So I would encourage you to reach out to me with questions about how you can kind of sharpen your saw in those different areas if you do have some questions. But I think that's kind of an opportunity a lot of people overlook a little bit. They just kind of assume they're strong in that area and not really take a moment to say like, I wonder if there's some things that can make us stronger in that area. It doesn't mean you're weak. It just means like there might be an opportunity to be stronger. So I would encourage you to see what opportunities might exist in all areas. One of the pieces, speaking of overlooked pieces, is e-grants updates. So ADOT champions all of their important elements regarding 5310 funding to their subrecipients through e-grants. And so if people that you have listed in e-grants are either working in a different department and don't do anything with regard to this program anymore, and they shouldn't be receiving the emails, you need to make sure that they're removed from having a role or responsibility as it pertains to ADOT e-grants. If they're no longer with the organization, you definitely want to make sure they're removed, right? For security purposes, et cetera, because they might still have the login and password. So you want to make sure you take a look at that. You can give people different permissions in terms of, to keep it simple, like read only, or they can actually actively write. Some people have a more of an administrator level. Some people have a slightly lower level. You want to give thought to, do we have the right people at the right levels within e-grants, but do we even have the right people still in e-grants? So as you have changes within your organization, whether people leave or just move to different departments, you want to make sure that e-grants reflects the right people at the right time and at the right level throughout the course of this year, because you do not want to miss any important updates from ADOT pertinent to anything with regard to 5310 as a subrecipient, but especially as a future applicant or current applicant, or, you know, as you're awaiting decisions on awards or anything like that. So e-grants, please make sure that it's updated. And then for those who don't even have an idea of what e-grants looks like, because you don't even have a password or a login or account yet, that's something we could champion together. So we will work with that as appropriate. So reach out to me for that. The other piece for helpful reminders on the grant application is, I would say, two things. Look at your metrics that you have, which ties back into a lot of the things that we just kind of went through together. Anything that drives your confidence on sustainability of the project. But what metrics do you have? What metrics should you be developing and tracking to help demonstrate or approve some of those sustainability pieces? And back to that, you know, how'd you come up with that number, those pieces? Or anything that would strengthen your application in terms of number of people you serve, number of trips, all those different data points. Start seeing, are there other pieces, that other metrics that you can incorporate or should be tracking in new ways to strengthen your grant application, both from just a holistic view, meaning like, here's what we do, but also that sustainability piece. Go ahead. Oh, I thought somebody said something. I apologize. Okay. And then the last is, in the grant application, it specifically asks what training sessions, whether required or optional, that you've conducted. And so I know some of the check boxes, if you will, fall under like first aid, CPR, PASS, etc. And some of those are 100% required, right? You have to do those. And then there's others that are considered optional. This is a competitive grant application. So if you want to stand out against those that are also applying, I would encourage you to make sure that you're obviously satisfying the required, but also like, where's your opportunity to grow in the optional space? And I think that's kind of a nice low-hanging fruit item from a coordination standpoint, because if you decide to champion an optional training requirement and you invite other organizations to also go through the training, not only are you satisfying the optional, but you're also getting credit for organizing or facilitating a coordination piece. So give thought to that. Where are the opportunities when you look at training for you to also perhaps get some credit under the coordination area? If you have a strength in a particular area under optional and you would like to host your own training or conduct your own training, or maybe you do it typically internally only, and you're like, you know what, maybe we could open up some seats to people outside of our organization, that would be something to consider and plan over the next year and have it serve you well, not only in satisfying, you know, required and or optional trainings, but also getting some credit for coordination. So some things to think about. That coordination opportunities are a huge part of the grant application process in terms of what you will share or document, but it's also a main piece that's scored according to the rubric. So looking for ways that you can show coordination efforts will be a big thing in a highly competitive grant. So make sure you take advantage of every opportunity to kind of see what opportunities exist for you to strengthen that portion of your grant application. So with that being said, we're going to move to the next part of coordination with regard to the grant cycle. And I think this is kind of like our opportunity as a region, is to say, like, how can we be stronger in this, right? What are some things that are somewhat foundational that we can use as building blocks to help us get to a different state of coordination, right? So as the adage goes, you don't turn a ship on a dime, right? So we're going to try and tack, right, a certain direction and eventually tack in a different direction. And eventually you'll see that we've actually, you know, covered some ground, so to speak. So if we're looking at coordination opportunities that exist potentially in the year ahead, give some thought to yourself in terms of like, what initiatives could you champion on your own, right? What does that look like? And what are some things that you might need some support around? Support from me, Andrew, support from other organizations within 5310, whether existing subrecipients or future applicants. Like, how can you work together to champion this, to elevate coordination in the region? Who are some of the people that you're already coordinating with? Or how can you elevate those coordination efforts? Those would be things to be thinking of. So MOUs, we've talked about that in the past, right? So memorandums of understanding. So do you have any opportunities to create MOUs? If you already have one, is there a way to kind of revitalize it, add something new to it, create, you know, additional depth, if you will, to it, to help illustrate not only do you have one in place and you have been doing coordination for a while, but you continue to revisit it and you're actually having it evolve or grow in its own right. So that'd be something to consider. Obviously, we talked about partnering with other organizations and looking at training efforts. When we look at client and non-client writers, I know everyone kind of has their own rule book on how that works for their organization. But I would encourage you to see if there are opportunities to look at that with a new set of eyes and see if there are some opportunities for you to find a way to help reach a coordination goal where you're comfortable taking non-client writers, but it's still within like your skill set, what you're experts at, and seeing if there are some opportunities to perhaps take on non-client writers, but maybe there's some very specific eligibility that needs to go into that. Maybe eligibility isn't the right word, but maybe some guidelines, like, we're willing to do it, but it has to be only on Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays between these hours and these hours, because based on bandwidth, that's the only time we could do it. Or our service area is this, and right now, based on fleet capacity and staffing, we could only probably go out another 5 miles, radius. So as long as a person lives in and needs to get to a place that's within that construct, probably could open up a dialogue on what that might look like. And those are just hypothetical, just examples. But what I'm asking is for you to kind of just take a look and see if there are some opportunities for you to start to lean into finding ways to incorporate what we would call like non-client riders, like people that you don't normally serve because they're not considered your clients. But what other opportunities to still expand your coordination efforts? So take a look at that. And then also be mindful of opportunities that can help you with like in-kind and local match over the next year, because 20% of a smaller number is usually a smaller number than 20% of a larger number. So if you've historically applied for like a minivan, which has a very different price tag, and perhaps applying for a cutaway, understanding what that local match amount will be and how to prepare well for it will be important. So as you look for opportunities to coordinate, etc., also be thinking about local match and in-kind. And then we do have the opportunity, obviously, to coordinate with not just other social service organizations that we've been familiar with, over the past years, right? Because we do have new coordinated mobility working group members present. So we have Elizabeth Lewis from Fellowship Square, right, with the assisted living facility. And then we have Interfaith Community Services, Tom McKinney, faith-based organization. So I would encourage you to look at ways that these two organizations might be organizations that you could establish an MOU with or partner with, and see how we could serve more people in our region, but also share your wisdom on this program and how it works, because much like you've had to reach out to other people over the course of however many years and learn from each other as well. So you know what it's like to be new to the program, and you have a fresh lens for what it's like to navigate different pieces of the program, but also you have a unique lens for managing different types of project fundings, because not everyone has applied or received operating funds. Not everyone has applied for or received preventive maintenance. So everyone kind of has a different perspective or unique lens on some of the roles and responsibilities that come with types of funding. So it's helpful for people to share their insights with that, because it helps all of us grow. And one of the things that I've learned is if you want to learn something quick, try teaching it to somebody else, because you'll learn it through a very different lens than if you just try to teach it to yourself. So it's one opportunity for you to also sharpen your own saw when you're sharing that kind of information with someone else. All right, so those are some things that I wanted to make sure that everyone was giving some thought around. The last two pieces before I open it up for some discussion is driver training. So since we were talking about training, so driver training is always at the forefront of everyone's mind for obvious reasons. But since we're looking at coordination and opportunities to share our different bench strengths, etc., give some thought to what are some pieces that are, I would call, like transferable skills, right? So one organization excels in this particular area for driver training because based on those that they serve, it's a very distinct need. But for other organizations, they might not necessarily always have that need be presented to them. It doesn't mean that wouldn't serve them well. And it doesn't necessarily mean that that particular skill set couldn't transfer well into serving the needs of the people that they do currently serve. So I think there's an opportunity for driver training to be elevated, especially as we think about accessibility for people with different types of mobility issues or disabilities. I think it's just a huge opportunity because everyone here has such distinct bench strength. So there might be opportunities to do kind of a train the trainer or do a driver training program for all the drivers to attend based on different elements in the curriculum that we would put together. So it's just some food for thought. I'm not telling you what to do, it's just something to consider, because I think it is an opportunity to satisfy a really big need in driver training, because it does help on a variety of fronts, including retention, et cetera. But also it could help us with regional coordination. So please give some thought to that. I know for some organizations, certain riders have personal care attendants, right? People who are advocates or ride with them. Some people might have case aides or case managers of some sort that ride with their particular client. So I think there's an opportunity even there with, what is the training that we can offer to people that might be stepping into the role as a personal care attendant, if that's more in like the paratransit space, or even for like, what is some training that can help with those that serve in a slightly different manner, but they're still accompanying someone in a client-based setting. I think there's some transferable skills as well, so I don't want that to be lost on anyone. And then the last part is everyone has resources or tools that they use every day that could be helpful to someone else. And so Beacon Group, on one of our most recent meetings, they shared software and tools that they're using and did a fantastic job of doing a presentation on how that software has served them well, and has graciously extended that if anyone wants to know more about it, to reach out to them. That's a great example of how you can share resources, but there's other organizations that all of you do great things all the time. You just haven't quite taken advantage of the opportunity to celebrate it or share it. So I know when we did mock site visits, a lot of you went through the process of answering certain questions, and through that, you were able to share some of the things that you do to be successful in certain areas. I would encourage you to kind of rewind the tape and think about that mock site visit that we did, and see what comes to mind on things that you knew that really help you be successful on the compliance, that might help another organization also be successful, because sharing those resources or those tools is another way to capture some coordination efforts that might get easily forgotten or missed. So take a look at what you do well and see what opportunities there are to share it and celebrate. So I encourage you to take a look at that as well. Okay, so I'm going to open up the floor a little bit to some of the things that we just talked about. In the primer, there is a lot more information beyond what I just shared, but those things are more rooted in safety. So I'll let you take a look at those. There are other parts that are still tying back to the new and expanded service that I would encourage you to think about. And then there's other things that you can give thought around that are more in the preventive maintenance space. So I think those are more just reminders of some of the things that we've already talked about. So I don't want to reiterate those, but they are listed in the primer. I think they're towards the bottom. I think there's 4 sections, like A through D, if I'm not mistaken. So I'm just going to open up to the floor to things that we've talked about so far, and see what questions or comments people might have, because this is a big topic, and that's why we're going to take the whole next year to prepare well for it. So I'm going to go ahead and see what questions or comments people have at this time. What questions does anyone have?
Hey, Janine, this is John Morrovelli.
Hey, John.
Hi, so we're in the starting the second year of a 2-year grant cycle. So this current year coming up, there's no opportunity to submit a grant, a new project, correct?
Correct.
Okay, very good. And I do appreciate all this information that you've been going over. It's great. very helpful for the following year.
You're welcome. Yeah, it's just for clarity for your question, John, for those that are newer to the process or brand new, just just join the group and trying to figure out what makes sense, what doesn't, is when you apply for funding for 5310, the grant cycle opens every 2 years. So we just had a grant cycle in this year in 2023, but you apply for 2 years worth of funding. So when John was mentioning about we're entering into the second year and whether or not there's an opportunity to submit another project, the submission of projects for that second year took place already. So that window has closed. So that's why I answered it the way I did. So we're taking 2024 to prepare well for what we might apply for during the fiscal year 2025 grant cycle, which will also be a 2-year grant cycle. We apply for year 1's worth of funding and year 2's worth of funding. Just so in case that was confusing in terms of when I'm saying for this year, or this coming year, we're preparing well in 2024 to be successful for fiscal year 2025 grant cycle. Any other questions? One quick thing is on the primer, when it talks about safety, there are some really good tips, if you will, or reminders with regard to driver safety. So hopefully they're just reminders, but some of the things were like making sure you have a copy of the driver records for each driver, that you making a road test for all of your drivers as part of like your applicant process. Like there's lots of different things in that primer that I sent out. It's good to review because some of those things could be in the grant application, but it also could help you identify opportunities to strengthen your grant application by illustrating either how you have elevated safety practices or championing these particular efforts, and through that you have some regional coordination efforts that are documented. So take a look at it kind of twofold, right? Where is there the opportunity to ensure you're satisfying obviously compliance related elements, but where is opportunity for you to go above and beyond for obvious reasons, right? To excel at what you do. But the other part is, how will that translate well into a grant application? So when those questions are asked in the application, oftentimes they're very on off, like yes, no, do you do this? Yes or no. And I think we get comfortable in checking yes or no to the things that are required, and perhaps don't always think of the significance of the optional. So I encourage you to look at both. Look at what's required and where's there the opportunity to elevate what's required. But then also look at optional and say, like, well, what can we do with the optional, right? To elevate our own standards, but also to elevate how we support people within our region. And what does that look like from a coordination standpoint, et cetera? And then how do we plan for that, right? So if you need funding for it, does that fall under mobility management? Is that a funding opportunity? If it doesn't fall under mobility management, but it's still a great initiative, is there other funding sources for that? Is there RTAP? Is, what funding sources might exist that are outside of this grant cycle? And then how do we pull it together? What support do you need from me to be successful in that? So I would encourage you to take a look at that, because those are some pieces I think that are often overlooked in the grant application, because I think we can just very easily view it as a very yes, no, and nothing more than that. But I think there are some opportunities that exist there, but perhaps they're just more subtle. So I'd encourage you to look at those perhaps subtleties of the application. What else? What other thoughts or questions do you have about the planning for the grant cycle? So when you do look at the timeline that I sent out, like I said, it's a tool in the toolbox. You're welcome to use it. You're welcome to modify it. You're welcome to make your own. It's just a tool out there that exists to have some sense of, here's some things that I need to be preparing around, and here's might be a good timeline to do it within. If you want to know the timeline for the actual grant cycle, not actual grant cycle, if you want to look at what the timeline was for the most recent grant cycle, it's in the guidebook. So if you look at the ADOT guidebook, it tells you when the NOFA went out for the 2023 grant cycle. It tells you when the application window opened, when it closed, when the preliminary awards were announced, etc. And so you can use that as your lens for what will likely happen in the 2025 grant cycle. Will it be 100% on point, the exact same dates, exact same time frame? Maybe, maybe not, but it's at least a good lens for what is likely to happen. So,
I mean, this is Mike Orvalley.
Yeah.
I guess just comments on some of the stuff you're talking about. I'm very happy to share training and stuff with other agencies, and I'm sure they are as well. But just some things to, I guess, consider for driver training that we brought up.
Okay.
Driver training can mean different things for different agencies. For us, driver training, that's pretty much everything we do. We drive, we pick up people, drop people off. That's all we do all day long. Other agencies that deal strictly with those with disabilities, they're more training them on, whatever they're training them on, and maybe they just transport them to the mall to, I don't know. So there's back and forth like with that. So their driver training could be much different than what ours is. We both, I think, could learn from each other, but their driver won't practice it as much as ours would, but then we would learn more on specific, I guess, disabilities that would help us deal with our riders better. So just something to think about. I think it still could be mutually advantage to both of us. One of the things that you also have to be aware of, I got a phone call from a driver from Sunvan that he had a concern about how one of our driver was dealing with someone that was using a walker. So we got through and talking about past training and different stuff. And his version of some of the trainings from past training is opposite of what we have as past training. So if we're sharing different ideas or sharing this training, it could be taken differently or used differently. Like Sunvan does this and we do this other. So we don't want to step on each other's toes either. So that was just something that I just learned just recently. It was just last week that this other driver called me. So I don't know if that's helping anything, but I'm just, I guess, to be aware other agencies could operate slightly different, I guess.
So you're saying the approach might be different relative to what is a suggested practice when it comes to past training? It doesn't mean one's right and the other one's wrong. It's just a different approach.
Correct.
Okay. All right. Yeah, I wrote that down. So thank you. No, I think that's a good point, right? So 90% of your day is transporting people to point A to point B for different types of trip purposes. And you have a broad range of clients, meaning with varying ages, varying disabilities, right? Different levels of mobility. So you see a broad range of needs every single day and are providing trips in that space, same Sunvan, right? Every single day. Whereas comparatively speaking, another organization who is still providing transportation services, but they might only be served. I don't want to say only like as if I'm minimizing it, because that's not my heart or my message, but the people that they serve might be more exclusively rooted in serving people with a developmental disability, or they might be focused on serving the deaf community, or they might be focused on serving blind or visually impaired, and and the list can go on. But with that, their trip frequency comparative to yours might be less, right?
Yeah, so they're more dealing with the individual people. So they'll have a lot more instruction on how to do that versus us. We get them on the bus, we get them secure, make sure they're okay, and we get them to to point A to point B. But we're doing that all the time. Where maybe they do that twice a week, kind of a thing. So it could be different in the aspect of driver training. There could be a totally different, I guess, training for that.
Right. I think I understand what you're saying. And I think that's a good point. So let's just assume that everyone here on the call serves the exact same audience, right? We serve the same, meaning that everyone is serving people with limited mobility, or everyone is serving people with developmental disabilities. There's no variance. Only the individuals that we serve is different, but the reason why we're serving them is the same. Our approaches could be starkly different, even though we're solving for the same thing. So there's an opportunity to learn from one another, even with that. But then for people or organizations such as yourself, who are serving a broad range of clients and different needs, if I'm hearing you correctly, someone who that's their expertise is serving people with developmental disabilities, or that's their expertise is serving people that are deaf, or that's their expertise serving people with visual impairment. Sharing their level of expertise with your organization could help you elevate the level of service that you offer and what you do every single day. In the same spirit, because you do trips more frequently, perhaps, than another organization, and you have a broader range of needs, there's perhaps some skill sets that are inherent to the training that you offer to your drivers, whether it be flexibility or the way that you approach trip planning, or the way you approach the doing of securements, because you recognize the amount of times people are going to get on and off a particular vehicle is different than perhaps another organization who doesn't do that volume of trips. Those types of skills could be highly valuable to their organization. So
correct. That is correct.
Okay. So I would agree with you. And I think that there's the opportunity, right, is for each organization to recognize, kind of like what I was saying with the grant application, is to not be so quick to just check the box and say like, oh, we do driver training. What does that really mean, right? And then when you look at the requirements, yes, you're satisfying the requirements. That's great. We want that. But how can we elevate those? How we can elevate those? What's that? Debbie?
I'm so sorry. Somebody just knocked on my door.
No, you're okay. I just wanted to make sure that A, you were aware that you had a mic that was open, but also B, that I wasn't being unintentionally rude to you and you were trying to ask a question and I wasn't responding to you. So
No. Don't worry.
Okay. All right. So I think there's an opportunity for us to just be cognizant of, hey, we're doing driver training. What does that mean? And where is there opportunity to elevate it? And then when we're looking at optional, what does that mean? And how can we take advantage of those opportunities, but really look at our own bench strength and say, like, how can we serve this up to advance coordination in our region? And just like you were saying, acknowledge that we're all serving people in different ways, and our trip volume, trip frequency might be different, but there's something that we can learn from one another, and what might that look like. And so back like what I was saying before, if there's something you want to champion, but you need some support around it, reach out to me, because there might be somebody else that also would like to jump in on that and see what they can do. And I can connect you with those people or help you find other resources that help you put that together, whether it be structure for curriculum design, or, seeing if it qualifies for RTEP funding, whatever the case may be, we could kind of look through that together. So I would encourage you to reach out to me if you have any questions or thoughts around opportunities like that. So thank you for sharing that. What else? So I'm going to go ahead and move to the next item in the agenda in just a moment. So I'm going to ask for my team to go ahead and pull up that slide. But before we adjourn, I wanted to ensure that people did see the timeline that I had sent out. And if you look at January of 2024, one of the items on there is your operating statistics. How to think of the word. Operating statistics for the past year, for 2023. So I'm going to be sending out a template for that. So I mentioned that because that document that I'm going to be asking for is rooted in so many of the elements that we have just kind of walked through together, because those are snapshots in time of where you've been historically in terms of people served, trips, etc., revenue miles, all those pieces that go into it. And it will serve you well in kind of looking back at where you've been, right? What did you do well in 2023, but also help you say, well, what's our sight set on for not just for 2024, but also 2025, 2026, because those are the years that you're applying for, funding for, essentially. So much like we were talking about with driver training, we don't want to miss the opportunity of saying like, oh, it's just a yes, no for required versus optional. I want you to also be mindful that when we ask for operating statistics, there's a lot of value in it that is somewhat obvious, in the sense like, yes, you want to communicate what you did. It's part of meeting your Exhibit A requirements, which is also in the rubric, as we mentioned. It also goes in our coordinate plan update, but it also sets a good foundation for you to open up discussion about what might be the next step of discussion for planning out future projects that you're going to apply for. So I'm sharing that because in January, end of January, that's when those are going to be due. So I want you to have plenty of time to pull all that together. And I know as the year draws to a close, people are busy with a variety of different things. And next thing you know, it's January and like, oh my goodness, I only have 20 days to get this all together. So I'm sharing with you now, so you have a little extra time on your side in case you hadn't looked at that timeline. So if there aren't any other questions, I'm going to give the rest of your day back and go ahead and adjourn today's meeting. I appreciate each and every one of you for the time that you've invested in today's meeting. Hopefully you're finding value in the primers. My hope is that they give you a lot of food for thought in general, in terms of things that you could do to be successful as a subrecipient, but also much like for this one, for the future grant cycle. But my hope is that they set the stage for us to have more fruitful discussions during the to the table with questions that they've already thought about, things that they would like to share, whether it be concerns, successes, etc., so that we can make the most of the working group meetings. So if you find value in the primers, let me know, give me some feedback. If there's things you'd like to see in the primers that aren't there, I welcome that feedback. Same with any of the tools that I send out. If there's something that you like about it and would like me to keep doing let me know. So I keep doing that. If there's something you're like, I appreciate your heart for this, but it is not helpful. I'm okay with that kind of feedback too. So I'd rather create a tool that works well for you and it'll be used, having it just, going into the little recycle bin on your email. So let me know how I can serve you well. Thank you all again for all your time. I appreciate each and every one of you.